Every generation has been fascinated by magic, regardless of how not real it is. Nowadays, of course, magic is largely relegated to the realm of entertainment trickery. I can only do one magic trick, and it's not very good. I can make this deck of cards disappear. All I have to do is snap my fingers like... Oh. I appear to have some kind of animal paw. Let me just put... Oh. Tonight's story is about a wizard and a witch, and the centuries they spent battling monsters, and maybe some of their own demons as well. See you after the closing credits.
There's an obscure apocryphal legend about the wizard who haunts cemeteries. An incomparable apparition that visits not just one, but all the cemeteries. Every cemetery in the world. People in every corner of dry land have witnessed this phenomenon. A strange little creature who's more beard than man. A long pointed hat that cascaded across the top of his head and spread into a wide brim, and a pair of bat wings protruding from his temples. And he clearly wasn't corporeal. An unsanctified ghost from a long-forgotten age. An age of magic and weirdness, when neither was tolerated and both were unavoidable. This wayward wizard was always seen with his pipe. A long, crooked pipe. One end of it was ensconced in a mouth that nestled somewhere deep within his facial nest. The other end burned with a lilac luminescence. The old wizard wafted between the gravestones, smoking his pipe and blowing out an amethyst mist. Yet it was more than the color that differentiated it from standard fire-forged smoke. This mist contained a song, a genuine audible song, within the smoke itself. Or more accurately, the song was the mist. In thicker concentrations, it was louder and clearer. As it physically dissipated, likewise, the music faded away into nothingness. The song itself was an ethereal yearning, an innocent, mournful croon that once emanated from a sinister universe. Driving the song was a woman's voice, a heartbreaking intonation, an infinity of wordless beckoning. Once upon a time, it called out to her lost love. This was the song of the witch. The witch was gone now, in both body and spirit, obliterated from every plane of existence. All that remained was her song. It was kept in a golden vial, and that vial was in the possession of the wizard. He didn't keep it to himself, though. He wished to share it. Not with the living, they wouldn't understand. He only shared it with the dead.
All of them.
The wizard's real name was Athanasius the Frith, but nobody knew that. Everyone just called him the Wizard. He was created 10 minutes before the beginning of the universe. A cosmic hairball, hacked up by the same monstrous forces that vomited all of known reality. Magical beings were a bit more common at the beginning of time. Producing them isn't easy. Their flesh and organs are uniquely fortified. A normal human body could never contain their consciousness. Perhaps hundreds of them could, but no single flimsy mortal. The wizard's heart was a collapsing star. It pushed the cosmogenic blood through his veins. The primordial soup of the universe itself. The black seed of oblivion. The wizard slithered along on his beard, or flitted on the winds beneath his wings. His crooked pipe didn't sing a song back then, it just held a quiet blend of nutmeg, melancholy, and uranium. He spent centuries living in Mount Purgatory after it was abandoned when people gave up on the concept of redemption. He filled it with hundreds of strange creatures, all the animals that Noah refused to bring on his famous ark. He taught them how to think and communicate, and they became a thriving civilization. Enlightened pioneers, they were most famous for inventing color. They sold color around the world. It was lucrative for a while until copycat companies started making cheaper, less interesting colors, and the market collapsed. Soon, everything in this universe was in color. The business folded, and Mount Purgatory was torn down and replaced with a trendy new suburb of hell. With the loss of his home, the wizard felt like a stranger everywhere he went. He despised mortals, but he wasn't fond of anyone else either, so he remained alone. He missed his mountain and wished to someday build one of his own, possibly as a tomb, if he was ever lucky enough to die. He could be cursed with immortality, he wasn't quite sure, but the thought that he could be immortal terrified him. In the meantime, he simply roamed the world, century after century, millennia after millennia, lost and meaningless, until the witch slowly manifested into his life. The witch's real name was Zarastoundra Beguilet, but nobody knew that. Everyone just called her the witch. She was created by a long-forgotten god who concocted a love spell to seduce his own sister, which, quite honestly, happened all the time back then. But this love spell was so powerful, a magical consciousness evolved, and even a physical body to contain it. Flesh and bone, an enormous beating heart that pushed the black seed of oblivion through her enchanted veins. The witch rejected the purpose of her birth. She would never force romance where it wasn't wanted, so she ran off to find her own way. She sailed the seas and walked across all 8 continents. But wherever she went, trouble followed. She radiated love like no other being before or since. This made her almost impossible to resist. She was constantly besieged by the affections of men and women and animals and vegetables and elements, all desperate to win her love. It became overwhelming, until finally she chose to turn away from romance forever. She grew her long dark hair into thorny vines and wrapped them around herself to protect her from others. Over the years, she grew more and more of them until she was all but cocooned by their unwelcoming fingers. The witch chose to devote her life to spreading happiness. She was filled with love and felt it her responsibility to share it, to help where she could. So she meditated. She cast spells, she chanted, she sang. Sometimes she broadcast her love out of volcanoes to send it far and wide. Other times she focused it on situations or individuals. She helped those in need. She'd sing the songs that saved people's lives. Her talents became famous, and her services were highly sought after. That's how she first crossed paths with the wizard. About 8 centuries ago, somewhere in Europe, there reigned a long-forgotten kingdom called Erathera Merifera. It was a very unhappy realm, ruled with an iron claw. The king was an evil, fire-breathing
Dragon Warlock.
known by his enemies as the Ceaseless
Abscess.
Every man, woman, and child in Erathera Merifera was forced to work in the gold mines of Mount Mura, and every ounce of gold discovered was cleaned, refined, sliced,
Seasoned.
Sauteed.
and served to the Ceaseless Abscess. The dragon greedily devoured every shiny piece, refusing to eat anything else. The beleaguered villagers sought help, and the first person they turned to was the legendary witch. She found the prospect
Daunting.
she usually solved much more personal problems, disputes between families or neighbors. Saving an entire kingdom seemed a touch beyond her remit, but the witch was never one to turn down a cry for help. If the weary citizens of Erathera Merifera needed to be rescued, she would do her best. The witch floated before the gates of the dragon's castle. They were guarded by his pet behemoth named Crunch, a giant elephant octopus with flickering Venus flytrap ears. Crunch roared at the tiny intruder who dared to challenge him, but the witch didn't flinch. Instead, she sang. Her lips parted and emitted an unearthly writhing of ethereal melodies. They swam through the air and slithered between the fangs in Crunch's ears. The music swelled, the walls shook. It changed everyone it touched. Strangers expressed their undying devotion for each other. Cats apologized to the families of the rats they had eaten. But within the castle, deep in the innermost of inner sanctums, the Ceaseless Abscess sensed something was amiss. As if the wind that blew through the windows was somehow smiling. It was a song, growing even louder, expanding in intensity, and retracting the skin over his talons. He suddenly began to worry about the doors to his chamber. The witch strode in, riding atop Crunch, her new loyal steed. His coiled, tentacled legs pulverized the intricate mosaic floor tiles. The witch confronted the fearsome dragon. The Ceaseless Abscess sneered.
His opponent wasn't bothered.
She simply opened up and sang. The beautiful harmonies leapt on the unsuspecting dragon. They ran down his scales like beads of sweat. The song was an onslaught of pure love. The Ceaseless Abscess had never experienced anything like it. All he had ever known was evil. He was made of it.
His father was the first 2 letters of the word evil, and his mother was the last 2.
The witch's love spell was an entirely new concept to him. He had no idea what to do with it, but he knew he wanted it. The dragon inched closer, girding his loins against the ever-growing power of the witch's song. The music melted the gold in the beast's belly and singed the lashes on his eyelids. It brought grown men to tears, and infertile women found themselves pregnant. The crops in the fields engorged, every bird in the kingdom, knowing they could never compete with such an exquisite sound, immediately retired from singing and took up tap dancing. But the wily warlock had one more trick up his sleeve. If he could just get close enough. The Ceaseless Abscess spewed forth a jet of flames, and aimed it directly at his former watchdog. Crunch howled in anguish. The sheer force of the fire tumbled the behemoth helplessly backwards, throwing off his new mistress. He crunched into the far wall, where the creature was rendered unconscious. But the witch's song continued unabated. She sang of love and hope without stumbling over a single note. It stirred equal parts fear and envy in the cold dragon's core, and this was his chance to keep it all for himself. The beast reared back, extending his tiny arm, and then followed through. A projectile ejected from his claw and wrapped around the thorny enchantress. Her song began to grind to a halt. Suddenly, all the powers in her veins felt stifled, like a tidal wave clattering against an indomitable dam. The witch's magic had been nullified. Darkness enveloped her. She was trapped, defeated by the most daunting weapon in the dragon's arsenal, a tiny container capable of neutralizing the effects of magic. Once fallen from a lesser-known tree in the Garden of Eden, this was the fabled disenchanting walnut. A few terrible years later, the wizard flew into town. He was touring the continent, mountain spotting, looking for ones he liked, measuring them, naming them, drawing pictures of them on the sides of rivers. That's how he found Mount Murua. It looked sad, deflated, like someone was hollowing it out. The people of the surrounding realms readily explained the strange tale of Erithera Merifera. They told him of the Ceaseless Abscess, a terrible gold-eating dragon who ruled the kingdom and forced the villagers to mine the mountain. But recently the monster had grown worse. Not content to ruin the lives of his own subjects, he recently began terrorizing the neighboring fiefdoms as well, randomly flying over them and bombarding them with flames. Not even for any personal gain or purpose, but just out of pure, unadulterated contempt for the universe that swirled around him. These villagers were angry,
As was the wizard. This was no way to treat a mountain.
so he secured a private meeting with the Ceaseless Abscess. The dragon was happy to confide in the wayward wizard. The beast explained that he was furious because he was married to a beautiful witch, but she didn't love him back. He forced her to marry him even though she refused. He has to keep her trapped inside a magic walnut shell just so she won't escape. The dragon wanted her to love him and sing him beautiful songs. Instead, he must do all he can just to prevent her from getting away. The evil warlock demanded the wizard's help. He must force the witch to love him, or else he would burn down the entire world. With little choice, the wizard agreed. He instructed the dragon to hold his wife's walnut in his claw. The wizard himself placed his own hand on the scaly fist. The seed shell suddenly grew very bright and then dissipated. The wizard drew back and explained. The witch was now pregnant. She was carrying the dragon's child. All he had to do was release her from the shell and they could bond over their new family. As the Ceaseless Abscess considered this turn of events, the wizard quietly slipped out of town, long before the inevitable disaster had a chance to unfold. The dragon finally released the witch from the walnut. As promised, she was indeed pregnant. In fact, she was already at full term. She gave birth the very next day. She had a daughter, a tiny, perfect dragon daughter. But there was one detail the wizard failed to mention. The child was made entirely of gold. A living, breathing baby with gold skin and gold fangs and gold eyes. Gold blood pumped around the gold organs within her frail golden body. The witch loved the child. She named her Marua after the mountain. The dragon also loved his new daughter. In fact, he found her completely irresistible. And the first chance he got, he seized the child
And devoured her whole.
Far outside the kingdom, the wizard wondered if he had done enough. Pulling a variation on the old Midas trick was fun. He calculated that it would be just enough of a bone of contention to spell the dragon's downfall. The wizard didn't want to kill the monster himself. He just wanted to free the poor woman in the walnut, so he bestowed a reason to let her out. He could feel her power. He knew she had the potential to be more than a match for an out-of-shape dragon with a bad diet. He kept wondering about that walnut woman. He never even saw her. They called her the witch. Was she a good witch or a bad witch? Did she deserve her imprisonment? Should he have stayed to help her more?
No.
He thought it was none of his concern. He had meddled in her life enough as it was. Just then he heard a sound approaching, slicing through the air like a blade. A scream of pure fury and vengeance. A scream so powerful, the very ground beneath it cracked open. From the crust to the core, even the wizard was stunned by the noise, and he tumbled through the crack, all the way down. The witch's scream brought down the walls of the castle. In fact, the entire kingdom of Erathera Merifera crumbled to pieces in an instant. The ceaseless abscess stood in the ruins of his home, cowering before the might of the woman he had wronged. They stared each other down. The witch was incandescent with rage. The dragon had just devoured her only daughter. He knew there was no way out of this now. It was either him or her. He drew in his breath to prepare. The pilot light in his belly ignited. The flames raced up his long neck. But the witch's immolation didn't happen. Instead, she saw a single tentacle wrapped around the dragon's throat. From out of the rubble emerged Crunch, proving his loyalty to his new mistress. Crunch's trunk sunk deep into the dragon's esophagus. The building flames inflated the beast's body. The witch braced herself for an explosion, but instead the fire seeped through his scales and burned away his flesh, all of his flesh, until he was nothing but bones and organs. The ceaseless abscess was defeated, but the villagers of Erathera Merifera were not grateful. With their homes destroyed and no one left to blame, they turned their vengeance to his mysterious wife, unaware of her involuntary role in their monarchy. All they knew was that she was a genuine witch who had just birthed a golden dragon of her own. To prevent her birthing more, they prepared to burn her at the stake. The witch was too despondent to fight back. Her only child was dead. To her, it felt like part of her soul had broken off, drifted away, and sunk into the sea forever. If an army of angry villagers wanted to kill her for no logical purpose, so be it. The witch watched as the villagers' torches set the kindling ablaze. Just at that moment, a vast shadow passed overhead, and a warm wind blew through the valley, gently extinguishing the fire. Nobody knew what was happening, but surely it had something to do with the enormous wooden spear that was descending from the sky. The angry mob crooked their necks up and watched as the timber thumb from above grew larger and squished them all dead. The lone survivor, an unlit witch tied to a stake. Or rather, formally tied to a stake, as her binding seemed to have fallen away.
The wizard had tumbled all the way to the center of the earth.
where no mortal eyes had ever peered. He found himself in a cavern. There was only one source of light. Floating in the center of the room was a flickering avatar of planet Earth. The holographic globe was a precise replica. It rotated at the same rate. Its tides were in sync. The clouds drifted on the same paths. And all across it, tiny copies of every living being walked in time with their originals. Was this a copy, the wizard wondered? Or was this a live broadcast? The illuminated earth at the center of the room was being manipulated. 4 giant fingers played across its surface like some complex musical instrument. They came not from a hand, but rather a pair of eye sockets. Flanking the planet were 2 large faces, embedded in the opposing walls. The faces of wrinkled old crones. And instead of eyes, they had long, crooked fingers that poked and prodded the glowing sphere with precise intent and purpose. The wizard knew exactly who these women were.
These were the Fates.
The ancient beings who guided the destinies of every living creature in the world. Their determinations were as unyielding as the stone they were carved from. Unsurprisingly, they weren't surprised to see him. They instructed him not to touch anything, and if he was patient, they would arrange a conveyance back to the external world. The wizard nodded in appreciation. He stood by and waited, idly chewing on a toothpick. But the wait was interminable, and he couldn't help but inspect this unique operation. He leaned in close to the globe laid out before him. It was magnificent. The swirling clouds, the crashing tides, the chatter of 1,000,000 people who didn't know he was watching them. The wizard wondered what happened back in Erithera Merithera. Was the dragon slain? Did the witch escape? He had no idea. Squinting through a magnifying glass, he decided to take a look for himself. No monsters to be seen. The creature's kingdom was razed to the ground, and there was a commotion just outside the remains. An angry, torch-wielding mob. The focus of their rage appeared to be the tiny figure tied to a stake. They were about to set the poor captive aflame. She was too small for his old eyes to make out, but he thought perhaps she might be the witch.
That's how witches were usually treated after all.
The witch's death inscribed in smoke. None make shade, a sing stroke, lest a rage the rogue profile.
The wizard didn't like this answer.
Incineration is the worst way for a magical being to die. It destroys them body and soul, a fate from which they can never return.
Nope.
No, this wouldn't do at all. He gnawed indignantly on his toothpick and decided the consequences were worth it. Again, he leaned into the planet, gently blowing a gust of wind to extinguish the fire. Then he plucked the toothpick from his mouth and used it to squish
The villagers dead.
and suddenly a terrible screeching pierced the wizard's ears. The stereophonic sound of 2 stone deities whose strict stipulations had just been irrevocably transgressed. The fates cursed the wizard for his vulgar violation of the natural order.
You have changed the one true path. We must forge a brand new strat, a timeline filled with fear and wrath, and you shall suffer the aftermath. Plague and pain shall fill your lungs. Your share of grief shall overrun. From now until her time is done, the witch and you shall never be one.
The wizard explained this was fine. He wasn't planning on seeing her again anyway. Smiles crossed the faces of the wily, finger-eyed hags. They didn't speak another word, apart from their command.
Release the helmet.
The witch was free, and she began to travel. She roamed the world on the back of her beloved Crunch. She spread love as best she could. She helped where she was needed, but still she was disappointed in herself. She was unable to tame that evil dragon. The witch determined that her song wasn't powerful enough. If she was to improve, she needed an exceptional instrument, and she had heard of someone who might be able to accommodate. Crunch crossed a continent. He trudged through a desert and swam across a sea until the witch arrived at her destination, a tiny, mysterious island known as Modest One Piece Atoll. There she met the greatest craftsman in the world, the giant Japanese gnome. She humbly requested his services, explaining her need for a most unique and personal musical instrument, a device to spread love in ever-darkening times. The giant gnome agreed. As payment, the witch gave him the only valuable item in her possession, the solid gold corpse of her deceased dragon daughter. For such a fine payment, the gnome promised that her instrument would be equally exceptional. As for its design, she made only one demand: to turn her past defeat into future success. The witch requested her instrument be carved from the bones of her captor. Deep below the crust of the earth, the wizard scrabbled through the rocky mantle, digging his path like a common worm. His fingers blistered and bled, his tongue was coated in coal, and his eyes began to devolve as the underground decades elapsed. Hot on his heels was a venomous hellmint. The only warmth the old man ever felt was the creature's furnace of breath as barbed tongues lashed at the soles of his feet. He was woozy, beginning to forget what air tasted like. He feared he may never reach the surface. Perhaps this was the curse of the fates, to spend an eternity so low that he could never find up. His punishment for saving a random person he never met.
A random person he's fated to never meet.
So be it. That's how he figured it. For once in his miserable life, he did the right thing. Everyone spends their eternities underground eventually, he thought. To the wizard, this was just an extended preview. The witch's wish was fulfilled. The giant Japanese gnome had crafted her the perfect musical instrument. A horn, unlike any other, carved from shimmering ivory dragon bones, and inlaid with the golden blood of her own daughter. This was no mere tool to be carried around. It was part of her.
Literally.
The horn was surgically grafted to her skull. Playing it came as naturally as thinking. Once it was comfortably acclimated to her head, she decided to go somewhere special to put its power to the test. So she climbed up to the top of the tallest mountain she could find and began. The witch's new song swam from her heart, swirled through her horn, and spilled into the sky. A song composed of notes that shouldn't exist. It stretched across the stratosphere and traveled all around the globe. The song fell to the earth in pink raindrops, a literal love storm. The fuchsia rainfall changed the lives of everyone it touched. Every person, plant, and animal. Wars ended peacefully. Famines ended abundantly. Grudges ended gregariously. Everyone alive or dead at the time felt its touch. A moment of clarity when every fear faded away. When all the people truly knew all the people. And still the wizard crawled, burrowing through the earth's crust, seeking the light with every fistful of jagged rocks, the poisonous helmet still pursuing him. After all these years, it was the only companionship he could remember, and it was trying to kill him. But he admired its tenacity. No one had ever shown that much interest in him before. To the wizard, this noxious demon wart was the closest he had ever known to true love. He pictured them growing old together, far into the future, still tunneling through the loam until the sun expands and swallows the planet whole. But then one day, he felt something new. A droplet had landed on his bulbous nose. It was warm. It clung to his flesh as if it was hugging his face. This was no mere concoction of hydrogen and oxygen. This bead of moisture contained joy, passion, hope. It smelled like the sky, like the clouds when they first huddled together to discuss staging a storm. This was some kind of raindrop, which meant he was near the surface. This little pink droplet of promise had slid through the soil and somehow landed on the tip of his nose. And even better, he could trace its path. It was so pervasive, he could sense where it flowed, and he could follow it back. And so he continued to dig, but now with purpose, with direction, doggedly tracking every micro molecule of pink liquid and the ventricle of dirt from whence it traveled, until finally the wizard burst through the floor and clambered out of the tunnel. He took a deep breath, drawing fresh air into his lungs for the first time in over a century. Then he collapsed. It was over, he thought. His ordeal was finally over. The Helminth. In all his elation, he forgot about the Helminth. The wizard lay helpless, too exhausted to defend himself. The beast leapt on him, infecting him with the deadliest of diseases. He could already feel it, ravaging his frail, immortal frame. Perhaps this would be his end, he thought. He sincerely hoped it would be. The witch traveled, spreading love through music and magic, riding on the back of her loyal steed Crunch. She traversed Asia and the Middle East when their civilizations were flourishing. But back in Europe, they had regressed into barbarians. Half the continent had been killed by a hideous plague that had suddenly erupted from the center of hell. They called it the Black Death. She could feel the oceans of sorrow crashing across the land. The pain was almost paralyzing. She chose to help, if she could. And she did. It was difficult. The plague fought back at every turn. But wherever she could, the witch saved lives, or at least brought comfort to the dying or the bereaved. But all the while she could sense something. A great power was nearby, a lament, unlike all the others. On her journey, she tried to home in on it, circling ever closer until she found its source in the tiny principality of Polyxania. The entire country had been abandoned. But for one In the middle of a misty moor stood a crooked tower, and someone powerful resided within. Powerful, but infirmed. The witch ascended the
2020 spiraled steps
to the single room at the peak of the structure. An altar stood in the center of the room. On it lay a motionless figure, draped in a black shroud. The witch approached. She lifted a wilted arm. It was covered in seeping buboes, but they weren't red like everyone else's. His veins were as dark as night, just like her own. He carried the black seed of oblivion. This was a powerful magical being, and he was still alive. The wizard had crawled to the top of the tower a year ago, just after he was infected with the plague. He lied down on a plinth and prepared to die. And he's been dying ever since. Or at least trying to. He was terrified that death would never come. He longed for it. But now, after all these months, a figure approached. The power they radiated was humbling. He could just about see through the sheet. Black robes, white bones. This must be the Grim Reaper. The wizard wanted to say something, to express gratitude, or reach out a hand. But every inch of his body was racked with pain. None of his muscles had the strength to move. He rallied all his reserved strength and used it to close his pustulated eyelids. The end had come at last. But the witch, in her wisdom, decided this poor wretch, whoever he was, deserved another chance. For him, she would put forth all the effort she could muster. She resolved not to leave the tower until this person was completely cured, even if she had to kill each and every diseased bacterium one by one. In fact, she thought, that may be the perfect solution. The witch took the fight inside, miniaturizing herself to the size of a speck of dust on the back of another speck of dust. She leapt into the ailing body through a festering chest wound. Then she commandeered a blood cell and rode it like her personal warhorse. She charged through the wizard's veins, singing a piercing song. She paralyzed the plague cells with fear. Then she swept by, cut them down with her sword. Molecule by molecule, atom by atom, the witch was a one-woman army, storming through every square nanometer of the wizard's bloodstream, and vanquishing every foreign invader with ruthless efficiency. After months of fierce battle, the last 3 bubonic bacteria were trapped between the lungs.
She executed them without mercy. It was done.
The plague had been ousted from the body. The wizard was cured, and the witch was free to leave. But before she did, her curiosity got the better of her. That immense power she felt, the power that drew her to this tower. It was here, inside this man. Anatomically speaking, it was right around the corner. It was the collapsing star at the center of the wizard's chest cavity. His heart. For months she rode its reverberations through his veins, but this was her first time seeing it in person. A yawning chasm of darkness and fury, alienation and pain. Every second of loneliness buffeting through the wind like hail. She could feel the wizard's entire life, all the way back to the beginning of time itself. The cosmic hairball lost in space, the smoke of his crooked pipe filled her lungs. She saw his old home in Mount Purgatory, and the bizarre animals he saved when God himself turned his back on them. including the ancestors of her beloved Crunch. She saw the invention of color, the wizard's achievements and his failings, everything that made him proud, everything that brought him shame. Her bones ached as he wandered for millennia. And then she saw him arrive in Erithera Marifera. This was the man who talked the dragon into releasing her from her walnut prison. This was the man responsible for bringing her golden daughter into the world. Tears poured down her face as the wizard tumbled to the center of the world. She witnessed his confrontation with the fates, the most formidable forces in the universe. But he did not heed their threats when the fires of destiny threatened to take the witch's life. This was the man who extinguished them. And then her fingers blistered as she recalled his penance. A century crawling through magma and stone, chased by a diseased monster.
This he did without regret.
He did all these things for her, and he didn't even know who she was. He had never even seen her face, nor she his. But now she had looked into his heart. Now she knew him like no other. The witch knew now that they were fated to never meet, although she hoped they one day would. So as a parting gift, she decided to send a message to the wizard that he would never forget. She picked up a stone and carved it with the tip of her sword. Then she threw the rock into the abyss below, and she closed her eyes, preparing to return to the world above. But fate had other plans. A dark claw emerged from the collapsing star, a devious fiend from another universe. It wrapped its talons around the witch and snatched her up with ease, pulling her into its dreadful dimension. The wizard suddenly realized he was alive. Alive and well. In fact, healthier than he'd been in millennia. The plague was gone, but he did feel a pang in his heart, as if someone was standing before his collapsing star. He could sense her. His entire life was washing over her like a tidal wave. All the pain and torment, all the self-loathing. He felt so vulnerable, so ashamed. He couldn't see her, but he knew who it was. He recognized her now. The witch had returned. She saved his life, and now she was staring into his very soul. The poor woman, he thought. Just as he was thinking this, the wizard was thrown against the wall by forces unknown. Unknown for a moment, but he soon worked it out. The witch was gone. A moment ago, she was radiating love from the stark wilderness inside of him, but now it was gone. Her sudden disappearance from his chest cavity was jarring, like a murder at a wedding. But he sensed that she wasn't just absent from his body, she was absent from the universe. He knew full well that his terrible heart led to a dark dimension. She must have been snatched away by some hideous demon from within it. The wizard's collapsing star grew dark with guilt. She saved his life. Now he needed to save hers. The wizard paced back and forth, considering a strategy. But as he did so, a dull ache was growing in intensity from deep within his belly. He tried to ignore it, but soon he was curled up on the floor, pinned down by a piercing pain. Then the anguish focused down to his groin. An excruciating obstruction was slowly working its way through his urethra until finally it was a kidney stone. The wizard picked it up and examined it. It was the first time those words had ever been directed at him. The wizard wept. He discovered Crunch loyally waiting for his mistress outside the Crooked Tower. He was quick to adopt the orphaned behemoth. Together, they set off. He realized that he knew nothing about this mysterious witch, so he decided to change that. The wizard traveled around, aimlessly at first, studying ancient texts, consulting wise scholars, gathering whatever information he could find about her. It proved easier than expected. Everywhere he went, he found people whose lives had been improved by this selfless sorceress. They excitedly ran up to him, seeing Crunch and assuming she had returned. When the wizard questioned them about the witch, they enthusiastically recounted tales of this elusive angel, swaddled in thorny vines, singing her song that healed souls. After a few years, his inquiries brought him to a tiny island known as
Modest One Piece Atoll.
There he met the greatest craftsman in the world. According to the legends, it was this giant Japanese gnome who crafted the mystical horn on the witch's head. The gnome had very little information about her, although he did present one item of interest: a vial of glass and gold, fashioned from her child's metallic corpse. It was, in a sense, the only physical remains of the witch in the entire universe. The wizard readily purchased the vial, and he treasured it for the rest of his life and beyond. But before he left, he asked one final question, because in all of his travels, with the benefit of all he's learned about her, he was still no closer to rescuing the witch. So he asked the gnome for advice. The gnome replied with a single word: north. Thanking him for his assistance, the wizard departed on his quest. He hopped on the back of Crunch and rode north. Mile after bleak mile he rode, beyond civilization itself. As time wore on, Crunch grew very old, too old to even walk. For a few years, the wizard carried the behemoth on his own back, until the beast finally gave up the ghost. A grand funeral was arranged. The sorcerer gave a touching eulogy, and then set the creature free atop a funeral pyre. For a moment the skies grew dark, and black rain fell. Somehow, somewhere, the witch was still out there, and she knew her old friend was gone. After that, the wizard set off alone, continuing his nebulous journey north to rescue a woman he never met
From a fate he can't imagine.
by doing something he hasn't thought of yet. He flew across a chilly sea and arrived on the shore of the little-known continent of Arctica, a barren wasteland of ice and snow.
There was no one for miles.
He couldn't understand how to save the witch from here, but he trusted the gnome, so he continued north. His wings succumbed to frostbite, so he resorted to walking. He walked for months through blinding storms and blistering cold, all the way to the very top of the planet, where all the north in the world came to an end. There he found a magnificent structure of glistening crystals, an enormous dais supporting 8 pearly pillars. The wizard had heard the tales of Arctica. He knew what this must be. This was the fabled ice gazebo of the psychedelic walrus yeti. He approached with reverence, climbing up the slippery slopes to the temple and slithering further to the inner sanctum. Within, it appeared quite cultured, eating, drinking, mingling, even reclining on a chaise lounge. But these citizens were the elusive walrus yeti, towering
Bipedal beasts,
rarely seen by god nor man.
rarely seen because they never left the Arctic.
And few people could survive the harrowing journey to the gazebo, although many tried. It was said that the creature's tusks produced an extremely powerful hallucinogen. The psychedelic walrus yeti consumed it from each other to stave off the madness of living in a featureless wasteland.
But they're fierce creatures.
Willing to attack and kill intruders intent on stealing their tusk milk. As is custom, once a walrus yeti has completed tripping on the milk of others, it tilts its head, allowing others to drink from its tusks, a process which is repeated all day and night. But on this particular night, one of the yeti was unlike any other. It
Stood on stilts.
and its own tusks were actually just elongated earlobes. With palpable trepidation, he placed his lips to a tusk and supped. His veins tingled for the first time since the witch left them. He looked up. The sky began to erupt into colors. Colors that even the inventor of color couldn't imagine. The aurora borealis stretched across the heavens like an incandescent wound.
And then the
Tiniest of openings appeared within it. He would never have seen it with his failing eyes, and it was emitting something.
amorphous flower.
A pink mist.
A song.
Deep at the bottom of
Time and space lurks a dark dimension, cordoned off from the rest of the universe for being so miserable. Only the most pained of hearts connected to this void, and only the cruelest of beings resided there. And one of the cruelest was a single sentient surface, the Mobius pirate strip. It was an intensely covetous vessel, and when it sensed the witch, it knew it had to have her. Now she resides at its center, floating in the nothingness within, forever on display. The pirate strip couldn't see or hear her. It didn't have conventional senses. It just leached off the power she emitted, swirling around her, churning her emotions, keeping her for itself. The disadvantage of the creature's deafness was that it was immune to her magical spells, rendering her helpless in its thrall. The advantage was that it had no idea when she was singing for help. And so she sang. She sang her most beautiful song. She sang a song of love and loss, of hope for the hopeless, of defying the fates, a song of beckoning in search of a single recipient. Over and over she sang, year after year, decade after decade, until the moment arrived when a tiny gap appeared, and she glimpsed her old universe. And at the center of it was the wizard, and he was carrying something which the witch recognized, a golden vial. It was fashioned from her own long-lost daughter. The vial grew warm in the wizard's hand. He didn't even realize he was holding it. Looking down, he noticed it was open. When he held it aloft, it began to swallow the mist. The song reached down to the capsule, which eagerly contained it. The bottle was so ravenous, the wizard suddenly realized his own feet were lifting off the ground. The vial
Soared into the sky.
consuming every wisp of the song's trail. He held on, flying up through
The stratosphere.
ever closer to the ambient aperture above.
And then he broke through.
He was floating in an alien universe. It was very different to his own. Instead of light, there was blight. Instead of air, there was despair. It felt like every regret he had ever held.
This is where their pain came from. This is where his heart led.
He swam through the inky void of his own grief. It cascaded around him. It stabbed every pore in his skin. It shouted in his ears, desperately trying to convince him to turn back before he made a fool of himself. But he continued undaunted, following the mist of the song to its source. It was emanating from the center of a single sinister shape. In the blink of an eye, he was there, hovering before her, the witch and the wizard, face to face, for the only time in all of unrecorded history. This was the most beautiful creature that time ever wrought. That was their only thought. They drew closer to each other. Sparks erupted around their bodies. Their lips were millimeters apart. A uniquely singular moment. A moment which burst into a blinding flash of light.
The witch woke up. She felt cold.
It was a relief, as it was the first time she had felt anything in almost a century. She was back in the real world, but she was alone. The wizard was gone. He had saved her. Again. He knew the fates would never allow them to be together, so he used that knowledge against them. Because if he was stuck in the celestial trap, the witch couldn't be. To return her home, he sacrificed himself to a geometric pirate in a lost universe.
Composed of his own misery.
That, she decided, would not do. She defiantly marched into the ice gazebo. The psychedelic walrus yeti were so shocked by her brazenness they forgot to attack her. Utilizing the advantage, she reached out and grabbed 4 tusks. She clutched them in her fists, firing gallons of hallucinogenic milk into her mouth. The intensity radiated from her skin. For a moment, both universes converged in the same position. Hovering above the ice gazebo was the Mobius pirate strip, and at its center was the wizard. He floated unconsciously, passively accepting the violent wrath of this jilted Euclidean circuit. The witch pulled one of her vines loose and fashioned it into a lasso. She spun it around her head and threw. The vine roped the pirate strip, collapsing its structure in defiance of the laws of mathematics. She spun the monster around and around in the sky, but she knew she could never allow it to wreak havoc on her world. A thunderbolt ripped across the night. The sorceress pivoted her prey, and her vine wrapped around the fleeting spear of light. The dreaded scourge of 2 dimensions convulsed in surges of electrical rage. The wizard awoke, floating in a frigid sea. There was nowhere to stand. The entire continent of Arctica shattered into pieces and sunk beneath the waves. The Mobius pirate strip was dead, electrocuted by the witch. She saved the wizard's life again. But this time, she sacrificed herself in the process. Magical beings can often survive their own death in some form, but not after a fiery death like the one she experienced. The witch was gone, her body and her soul disintegrated into nothingness, never to return to this universe or any other. And it was all his fault, the wizard concluded. None of this would have happened if he didn't have such a dark heart. His remorse grew until the weight of his guilt became so heavy he sank to the bottom of the newborn Arctic Ocean. His sense of worth was so cold, he slowly became encased in ice. The glacier was captured and brought to dry land. There was a large continent nearby that was appropriate for private meetings. Colonists were encroaching from the east and the south, and the native populations scrambled in between. But here, in this largely uninhabited western desert, they could be all alone. The iceberg was placed atop an enormous mesa, where it rapidly melted away into nothingness. Free-flowing oxygen filled the wizard's lungs for the first time in over 300 years. He was so cold for so long. Now he was suddenly hot, sweltering, in fact, and there was a tickling sensation at his fingertips. His eyelids separated operated with great difficulty. Peering over, he found that someone was running a handsaw across his fist. Fair enough, he thought. There was nothing wrong with people scavenging garbage for recycling. He didn't want his own body anymore. He was content to allow the animals to pick away at it. The old sorcerer lay passive and supine as his hand was fiddled with. They tried to slice it off, burn it, crush it, pry it apart with elephants, but it remained clenched. After a few days of this, his curiosity was piqued. Someone was trying to gain access to his palm, and they were unrelenting. The wizard sat up to confront his assailant.
A hideous beast
Stood before him. It had no skin or bones, just a tight-knit collection of bodily organs held together by a freestanding nervous system. Perched atop a long neck were a pair of reptilian eyes. Familiar eyes. This was the ceaseless abscess, the terrible warlock dragon that he had tricked half a millennia ago in Erythera Merifera. As soon as the creature realized his captive was alive, he roared, insisting the wizard release his prize, demanding to be given the witch's song. Confused, the wizard briefly opened his hand. In it was the gold vial, and swirling inside was a pink mist.
Then he began to discern the situation.
This dragon had survived centuries of anguish and vivisectioning, bolstered only by his obsession with a woman who rejected him. And now that she was gone, he was attempting to seize the only remnant left of her, the witch's final song, preserved for the ages in a capsule she birthed. The old wizard didn't even realize he still had it, his grief preventing him from seeing its true value. And yet it was clenched between his fingertips with all the tensile strength of a tectonic plate. So he cracked it open. One wisp escaped, curling up his nose and blooming into his brain. Suddenly it all came flooding back. His mind cleared as a gust of pure love swept the dark clouds away. Finally, he was capable of thinking straight, and he understood that for once in his long and pointless life, he had something to fight for. The ceaseless abscess reared back, inhaling, and a burst of flames erupted from his maw. The wizard did not withdraw. He stood firm and held the vial before him like the fulcrum of his faith. It easily deflected the fire, harmlessly curving around the sorcerer, saving him from an irreversible demise. Recognizing the need for brains over brawn, the dragon tried something more novel. The deboned demon lunged at the wizard, swinging the electric shaver to and fro. His hirsute opponent deflected its blows with the vial, but the dragon was faster, repeatedly lopping off locks of hair. The two warlocks dueled in this fashion for hours, gold clattering against aluminum razor foil. The follicles flew around them in a blinding gray flurry. Even the mighty ceaseless abscess was rendered woozy by his own melee. His nervous system's toes stepped back to assess the situation. Once everything was settled, the wizard was nowhere to be seen. All that remained was his hat. Surrounding it was a sea of sliced strands. Cautiously, the dragon lifted the ridiculous pointy hat. Hiding beneath it, he discovered a strange, sticky ball covered in loose hairs. He gently blew across the mysterious sphere to reveal all that remained of the wizard was his heart. The collapsing star was about to complete its collapse, and it was absorbing all in its presence. The ceaseless abscess struggled against its pull, but the old heart was too powerful. The dragon was sucked into the dark universe, and the collapsing star shrank down and irised out of existence. Its final heartbeat beaten. And from the hairy ashes arose the wizard's ghost. He tricked the dragon again, and all it cost him was his life. The apparition picked up his hat and shook it out. From it fell his crooked pipe and golden vial. He gathered his possessions and floated away. Once more lost for purpose, the wizard took up his old pursuit of roaming aimlessly around the world. He still possessed the witch's song, but he wasn't sure what to do with it. He discovered it could actually be smoked. He put a little in his pipe and ingested. When he did, he could feel the pure love of the witch billowing through his ectoplasmic manifestation. It quite literally cleansed his soul. When he exhaled through his non-corporeal lips, it bloomed into a beautiful pink mist that sang the witch's final song. The wizard visited a cemetery one night, and he shared the song with the dead, blowing it across the surface of every grave and within the cracks of every tomb. Then he moved on to the next cemetery, and he did it again. Once he had haunted every cemetery on one continent, he moved on to the next continent, and all of their cemeteries. One by one, he visited every grave in the world, inhaling the witch's song, feeling the passion of her voice in his lungs, and then blowing it out over everyone's final resting place. The music swept through the blades of grass, and sunk through the dirt,
and seeped
through the coffins, circling the edges of every desiccated eardrum. The wizard spread the witch's song as far and wide as death itself, in the vain hope that she was still out there somewhere on some far-off astral plane. Perhaps some of these souls will reach her one day and tell her that she's still remembered across the dimensions. The wizard visited every grave on the planet until finally the last of the song was gone. It took him almost 3 centuries. He began to grow cold. Smoking the mist was the only way he was capable of feeling warmth. He spent 300 years disseminating it to the dead.
Now it was spent.
He no longer had the song, or the witch, or even himself. The ground beneath the wizard began to tremble. Foul-smelling smoke emanating from the graves followed immediately by the bodies themselves. They weren't just rising from the graves, they were burning through them, burning through their coffins, burning through the dirt, burning through the doors of their tombs. Their eyes were fogged by an amethyst mist. The living dead stumbled toward their target. Graves around the world came to life and descended on the wizard. They crawled across continents. They swam across seas. The first zombie to reach him held out its arms and embraced him, as did the next zombie, and the one after that. It was a hug that became a group hug, and then became a hill, and then became a mountain. The real soul of the witch was in her song, but she was made of magic. Only a magical body could house it, and all the magical people were gone. No normal human body could ever contain her consciousness. Perhaps hundreds of them could, or if they were dead, perhaps millions. And to contain the wizard's spirit as well,
then perhaps billions.
If they were all combined. Every cadaver in the world possessed by 2 eternal souls, congealing into a single undulating mountain of love and necrosis. The wizard and the witch,
Isolated in life,
separated by death. Now,
Finally and forever, united in flesh.
They got together in the end simply by congealing every corpse on the planet into a single giant flesh mountain.
Tale as old as time.
Do you know anyone that's died? Do you ever visit their graves? Well, you don't have to anymore. Their remains are now interred within a towering pile of cadavers, all of which are possessed by two ancient weirdos.
Just so they can feel it.
Be sure to thank them for their service. I'd like to thank tonight's extra special guest star, my dear friend, Magickally Morbid. And yes, in accordance with fair casting practices, she is genuinely a witch. She came up with the haunting melody. All the layers of the song are her voice, nothing external added, apart from some versions of the song where she plays a singing bowl. Then I took all those tracks and mixed them together in my cauldron. Gotta stop calling it my cauldron. And, well, you heard the end result. What did you think? Good? Bad? Was it ethereal? Or just ethereal? Feel free to comment and let us know. I had no idea what I was doing. She was great, though. She's an amazing singer, and she plays instruments covered in dead animals. She's also an accomplished painter. She's been featured in several art galleries. She also makes jewelry and wind chimes and other stuff out of dead animals. Did I mention the dead animals? She doesn't kill them. She just finds them in the woods, tears them apart with her bare teeth. She also has bear teeth and other teeth. She was the perfect witch for the witch's song, and I'm eternally grateful to her. I'd also be eternally grateful to you if you could spread the word on our little show. Tell your friends about it. Share it on social media.
TikTok.
Do a Reddit.
Write a review.
Talk about it on your podcast.
Carve it on your forehead.
Anything you can do to help us get more views would be greatly appreciated. I've still got a lot more stories to burn through. And, yeah, things are gonna get weird. Speaking of which, our next story is called
Here comes Billy Bastron.